Linux, huh? You're thinking about taking the plunge, and you're looking at Big Linux and Zorin OS.
Good choices.
You even sent us this YouTube video from Pedro Becerra,
Oh, yeah?
and it's all about comparing those two distros, especially on how they run on older computers, ones that aren't quite as powerful.
Yeah.
So that's what our deep dive is today. Let's get into it and see what we can learn from Pedro's experience.
And I think it's a really relevant video to start with. So many people have perfectly good computers, but they're just a little older, you know.
Mm-hmm.
He really put those distros to the test on a machine with only 2 gigs of RAM. 2 gigs.
Yeah, so this is for you out there who are saying, I don't want to buy a new computer. I want to make this old thing work. Which one of these is going to breathe new life into that machine? And right out of the gate, even downloading these distros, Becerra runs into some quirks, you know?
Yeah, with Big Linux, the download button was kind of hidden on their website.
Oh, really?
Made him scroll around to find it. And Zorin, well, their website was only in English.
Oh, interesting.
Which, for open source software, that's supposed to be for everyone.
Yeah, the irony.
You'd think it would be a little more accessible, wouldn't you?
Right.
It shows you that even in the open source world, user-friendliness isn't always guaranteed.
Yeah, good point.
But let's move on to the performance. So Becerra boots both distros up in live mode first.
So live mode, some people might not know. What is live mode?
So live mode, it lets you try out the distro, the whole operating system, straight from like a USB drive without installing it on your computer.
Oh.
So kind of like, test driving a car before you decide to buy it.
Yeah.
You get to see if it's a good fit for you and your hardware.
Gotcha. So Big Linux, it boots up in live mode. It's noticeably faster
Yes.
than Zorin. Zorin, he had to jump through a couple of extra steps just to get to live mode.
Right.
But I think the real test here is how much RAM each of them are using, and that's where things get kind of interesting.
Big Linux uses surprisingly little RAM. It's pretty amazing.
Wow.
Even when Becerra started pushing it a little bit, played a YouTube video. Now Zorin, on that little 2 gig machine, Zorin really, really struggled.
Oh, no.
There's even a part in the video where you can see it. The whole desktop practically freezes up when he tries to open YouTube.
Oof. So right away, if you are really tight on RAM, it sounds like Big Linux is the clear winner.
Yes, definitely.
But what is it about it that makes it so efficient? Is it using a less resource-intensive desktop environment, or?
That's a great question, and it's a little hard to say definitively without, digging into the code.
Yeah.
Big Linux uses KDE Plasma.
Okay.
And KDE is known for being very customizable. It can be resource-heavy, but they may have done some tweaking behind the scenes to boost the performance.
Right.
It could also just be, some really efficient memory management going on under the hood.
Right.
There's clever coding tricks they might be using.
So there could be a lot that we're not seeing. It makes you curious about all the other optimizations they've made. Okay, so we know it boots faster, it uses less RAM. How about install time? How long does it actually take to get this thing running on your hard drive?
Big Linux installed in 7 minutes and 45 seconds.
Okay.
While Zorin took almost twice as long, like 14 minutes and 45 seconds.
Wow, that's a pretty big difference. 7 minutes, that's really fast for a full install. For you, someone who's used to installing Linux distros, how does that compare?
Oh, 7 minutes is definitely on the fast side. Especially compared to some of those big distributions out there. Some can take like well over 20 minutes.
Really?
Even on modern hardware, yeah.
Wow. Okay, so Big Linux is pretty speedy across the board. So let's say you've got it up and running. Next thing you want to do, you want to install some software.
Of course.
Becerra tests this out by installing Telegram.
Okay.
Which I think is a pretty good, standard app that a lot of people use, messaging app.
Yeah, cross-platform.
What did he find?
Both distros were able to install Telegram no problem,
Oh.
straight from their app stores.
Okay.
But Becerra pointed out that Big Linux's app store actually has a wider range of software, including things like Flatpaks and packages from the AUR.
Now, I'm sure some folks listening are like, wait, what? What are those? Could you explain that a bit?
Sure.
Yeah.
So imagine you need, I don't know, like a graphic design app.
Okay.
But your distro's app store doesn't have it.
Right.
Flatpaks are a way to run apps kind of in their own little bubbles. Makes them work on pretty much any Linux distro. So you might be able to find that design app as a Flatpak. Think of them like apps on your phone.
Okay, they just work.
Exactly, they just work. The AUR, that stands for Arch User Repository. It's this huge online collection of packages specifically for Arch-based distros.
And that's what Big Linux is based on, right?
And you got it.
So it's like this bonus library of software that you have access to. That's pretty cool. So now Bazura throws in a little curveball. He decides, hey, let's try to install a Windows program, this thing called Cadell Live. I'm assuming now this is where it gets tricky, right?
Well, you'd think so, but Zorin actually impressed us here.
Oh.
It automatically offered to use Wine,
Oh, okay.
which is this compatibility layer that lets you run some Windows apps on Linux.
Okay.
It made it super easy.
So Zorin kind of held his hand through that whole process.
They did. Now, Big Linux didn't have that built-in Wine integration.
Oh, okay.
So he had to manually set it up with something called Lutris.
All right.
Both distros were able to install it. But Zorin, it was definitely a much smoother experience.
So if you're coming from Windows, you think you might need to dip back into that world to use a certain program or two. Zorin might save you some headaches down the road.
Yeah, for sure.
So far, it's like Big Linux is winning on performance and software options. Zorin's got those user friendliness points, especially for those ex-Windows users.
Right.
Where do we go from here?
Well, next we're going to look at Bazura's overall verdict on the two distros, and we'll also explore some things that he didn't really touch on in his video,
Okay.
like specific desktop environments, or maybe thinking about your own specific software needs. So stay tuned.
All right. We'll be right back.
So after putting both distros through all those tests, Bazura ultimately gives it to Big Linux.
Yeah.
He calls it a crushing victory,
Wow.
especially for those low-spec machines.
Yeah. But he makes it clear that, this is his opinion based on his testing, what he was looking for.
Right.
He doesn't totally dismiss Zorin, does he?
No, not at all. He specifically says that Zorin OS might be better for people making the switch from Windows, because that familiar interface can make things a lot easier.
It's funny you say that. It's like when I first tried sushi, I started with a California roll.
Oh, okay.
Avocado and cucumber, things that I recognized, made it a little less intimidating.
I love that analogy. I think it really speaks to the fact that user-friendliness is very subjective.
Right.
What feels intuitive to one person might not to another.
Exactly right. It's about what works for you, what you're comfortable with. So what does all this mean for you, our listeners out there? If you're trying to choose between Big Linux and Zorin, what should you take away from all of this?
Well, if you are trying to revitalize an older computer, one that maybe doesn't have a whole lot of RAM, Big Linux seems like the performance winner. Bazura showed it booting quickly, using resources efficiently, even handling that YouTube video without any issues.
Yeah, I mean, it was pretty impressive. But if you're coming from Windows, you're like, learning a new operating system, that sounds like a lot.
Yeah.
Zorin might make that transition a little bit easier for you. Familiar look and feel. And like we saw with that Cadell Live program, it can even make running Windows programs surprisingly easy.
Right. And I think it's important to remember that Bazura's video mostly focused on basic use cases. Booting up, installing some software, checking RAM usage, that kind of thing, which is all important, but there's a whole world beyond that,
It's like looking at a travel brochure that only shows beaches and cocktails.
Exactly.
You get a glimpse, but you're missing the culture, the history, all those little hidden gems.
Choosing a Linux distro, it's about more than just specs.
Yeah.
It's about finding a system that matches your workflow, the way you like to work.
Right. So this is where you, as the listener, come in. You got to ask yourself, what kind of software do I need for my work, for my hobbies? Maybe you've heard about a desktop environment that sounds cool. Do you like to tinker, customize everything, or do you want something that just works out of the box?
Right.
Those are all good questions to consider.
Absolutely. And the great thing about Linux is you can experiment. You can try different distros without having to fully commit. You can even run them in a virtual machine just to get a taste before you install anything.
Right. It's like trying on a pair of shoes. You want to make sure they fit right, match your style.
Exactly. And remember, there's a huge and supportive Linux community out there.
Oh, yeah?
Don't be afraid to reach out.
Yeah.
Online forums, local groups, whatever.
Yeah.
Everyone was a beginner once. People are usually happy to help.
Yeah, that's so true. When I first switched to Linux, I was kind of worried about that learning curve.
Yeah.
But honestly, everyone in those forums was just incredibly helpful.
It's great. It's the spirit of open source. Collaboration, sharing, helping each other out.
And speaking of community, you, our listener, You're part of our deep dive community.
Absolutely.
We want to know what you think. Have you tried these distros? What are your must-haves when you're choosing a distro?
Yeah, let us know. Leave a comment, reach out on social media. We love hearing from you.
But before we wrap up completely, I want to leave you with a little something to think about. Bazir